Part 1. The Invisible Thief. It was 11:30 p.m. and the house was completely silent except for the soft, blue glow of a smartphone screen illuminating Mark's face. Mark was lying in bed, but his mind was miles away, travelling through the filtered lives of people he barely knew. He scrolled through a former classmate's vacation photos in Switzerland, then a colleague's post about a recent promotion, and finally a video of a 20-year-old polyglot speaking 7 languages fluently. A heavy, familiar feeling began to settle in his chest. It wasn't exactly sadness, and it wasn't quite anger. It was a cold sense of inferiority. He looked at his own life. A modest apartment, a job that felt like a dead end, and an English vocabulary that seemed to stay stuck at the same level. He felt like he was running a race in slow motion while everyone else had been given a jetpack. "Why am I so far behind?" he whispered to the empty room. This question had become his nightly ritual. Mark was a victim of an invisible thief, comparison. This thief didn't steal his money or his car. It stole something far more precious: his joy, his motivation, and his sense of worth. By looking at the highlight reels of others, Mark had started to believe that his own behind the scenes was a failure. He had internalized the idea that if he wasn't the best, he was nothing. The more he compared, the less he practiced. Why try to speak English when that YouTuber sounded so perfect? Why save money when his friend was already a millionaire? The invisible thief had convinced Mark that his small efforts were useless. He was paralyzed by the gap between where he was and where everyone else seemed to be. He didn't realize that he was comparing his beginning to someone else's middle, and his reality to someone else's carefully edited illusion. Welcome to the English Oasis. Today, we are starting a journey with Mark. We are going to witness the moment he decided to take his life back from the thief of comparison. This story is for anyone who has ever felt not enough. It is for the dreamers who are tired of looking at other people's dreams and are ready to start building their own. Let's explore how Mark discovered that the only person he ever needed to beat was the man he saw in the mirror yesterday. Part 2. The perfect lives of others. The pressure didn't just stay on his phone screen. It followed Mark into his daily life like a dark, persistent shadow. Every interaction felt like a benchmark he failed to reach. When he went to the office, he sat in meetings, listening to his manager, Sarah, present complex financial reports. Sarah was younger than him, yet she spoke with an authority and a level of English fluency that made Mark feel like a child. He would have brilliant ideas, but he kept them locked inside his mind. He was too afraid that his accent wasn't international enough, or that he would stumble over a simple preposition. He compared his hesitant silence to Sarah's effortless eloquence. And the result was always the same: a deepening sense of shame. Even his social life had become a battlefield of status. Last weekend, he had coffee with an old friend, Jason. Within 10 minutes, Jason was talking about his new startup, his fitness journey, and the 3 books he read every week. Mark sat there, nodding and smiling while an internal voice screamed, "What have you done with your life?" Jason's success felt like a personal insult to Mark's own stagnation. It seemed like everyone had discovered a secret formula for life that Mark simply couldn't find. He began to avoid social gatherings altogether, preferring the lonely comfort of his apartment, where no one could measure his worth. This constant comparison created a toxic cycle. Mark became obsessed with the gap, the distance between his current reality and the perceived perfection of others. He spent hours analyzing why others were more successful. Did they have more luck? Better parents? A higher IQ? The more he focused on their why, the more he neglected his own how. He would buy expensive English courses, but never open them because the thought of how much he had to learn felt overwhelming compared to those who were already fluent. He was waiting for a magic moment where he would suddenly be as good as the people he admired, not realizing that success is built in the daily practice. The thief of comparison had tricked Mark into believing that life was a zero-sum game, that if someone else was winning, it meant he was losing. He viewed every success story as a reminder of his own perceived failures. His world was shrinking, and his spirit was becoming bitter. He was living in a mental prison where the bars were made of other people's achievements. Little did he know that the key to his cell was not found in working harder, but in choosing to stop looking at them entirely. He was about to reach a breaking point that would change everything. Part 3. The turning point. The mirror. The breaking point didn't happen during a big failure or a dramatic argument. It happened on a Tuesday morning, a day as ordinary as any other. Mark had hit the snooze button on his alarm 4 times, dreading the start of another day where he felt like a background character in his own story. When he finally forced himself to get out of bed, he walked into the bathroom and splashed cold water on his face. As he wiped the water away, he stopped. For the first time in years, he didn't just look at himself. He looked through himself. The man in the mirror looked hollow. His eyes were tired, not just from a lack of sleep, but from a lack of purpose. He realized that for the past 3 years, his mental energy had been spent on strangers. He knew exactly what a stranger on Instagram had for breakfast. He knew what car his old high school rival drove, and he knew the career path of a famous CEO. But he realized, with a shock, that he didn't know his own potential. Who are you living for? He asked his reflection. The silence of the bathroom was deafening. He saw a man who was paralyzed by the fear of being average. Yet he was becoming average precisely because he was too afraid to try. He had been so busy measuring the height of other people's mountains that he hadn't even put on his own hiking boots. He was stagnant, a prisoner of his own envy. It was a moment of radical honesty. He saw that his habit of comparison was not a motivation to be better. It was a poison that was killing his spirit. In that small bathroom, under the flickering fluorescent light, Mark made a decision that felt heavier than anything he had ever done. He realized a fundamental truth. Comparison kills growth, but consistency builds it. He couldn't control Sarah's fluency or Jason's wealth, but he could control his own morning. He understood that as long as he kept his eyes on other people's lanes, he would continue to crash in his own. He took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time, the weight in his chest felt a little lighter. He wasn't going to try to beat them anymore. He was going to start a different race entirely, a race where the only opponent was the man staring back at him. He grabbed his phone, but instead of opening his social media apps, he did something he hadn't done in years. He turned the device off. The silence was uncomfortable, but for the first time, it felt like a beginning rather than an end. Part 4. The Digital Detox Strategy. The first few days of Mark's new life were surprisingly painful. He hadn't realized how deeply his brain was wired to seek the quick hits of dopamine from scrolling. Every time he had a free moment, waiting for the elevator or sitting on the bus, his hand would instinctively reach for his pocket. When he felt the empty space where his phone used to be, a wave of anxiety would wash over him. He felt disconnected, as if he were missing out. This phenomenon, known as FOMO, fear of missing out, was the first wall he had to climb. To protect his new decision, Mark implemented a strict rule. The first hour is mine. He vowed that for the first 60 minutes after waking up, his phone would stay in a different room. No news, no emails, and certainly no social media. In the beginning, the silence was agonizing. Without the noise of other people's lives to fill his head, he was forced to sit with his own thoughts. And those thoughts were often uncomfortable. He had to face his own fears and his own lack of progress without any distractions. However, after about a week, something miraculous started to happen. The mental fog that had clouded his brain for years began to lift. He started to notice things he had ignored for a long time. The morning light, the taste of his breakfast, and the steady rhythm of his own breathing. Without the constant stream of images of perfect lives, his sense of inferiority began to fade. He wasn't looking at billionaires or fitness models at 7:00 a.m. anymore, so he didn't start his day feeling like a failure. Instead, he started his day with a clean slate. Mark realized that his digital detox was not about hating technology. It was about reclaiming his mental clarity. By removing the digital noise, he was creating a vacuum, and he knew he had to fill that vacuum with something productive. He felt like a soldier reclaiming lost territory. For the first time, his mind felt like a private garden rather than a public park where everyone was allowed to dump trash. He was finally ready to stop being a consumer of other people's success and start becoming the creator of his own. The silence, which had once felt like a punishment, was now becoming his greatest strength. Part 5. The Rule of 3. Minimalism for the mind. Once Mark had cleared the digital noise from his mornings, he faced a new challenge: the overwhelming feeling of being behind in life. In the past, whenever he felt motivated, he would create a massive list of 50 goals. He wanted to learn English, master coding, and go to the gym all in 1 week. Predictably, he would fail by Wednesday. feel like a loser, and go back to scrolling. He realized that his ambition was actually a form of self-sabotage. To combat this, Mark adopted a new philosophy, the rule of 3. The concept was simple but radical for someone who always wanted more. Every morning, he would write down only 3 specific tasks on a small piece of paper. These weren't giant goals. They were small, manageable actions. Like review 10 vocabulary words, write 1 professional email, and walk for 20 minutes. He made a pact. If he finished these 3 things, the day was a total success. Anything else he did was just a bonus. In the beginning, his ego hated this. A voice in his head would whisper, "Only 3 things? That's not enough." But Mark stayed firm. He understood that he didn't need intensity. He needed consistency. He realized that a mountain is not moved by a giant explosion, but by picking up 1 small stone after another, day after day, without stopping. By limiting his focus, he removed the analysis paralysis that had kept him frozen. He stopped worrying about the 10, 0 steps he hadn't taken and started focusing on the 3 steps right in front of him. This shift changed his relationship with time. Previously, Mark viewed a day as a failure if it wasn't perfect. Now, he viewed a day as a victory if it was disciplined. He began to feel a strange, new sensation, the satisfaction of crossing things off a list. At the end of each day, instead of feeling inferior, he felt capable. He was no longer comparing his progress to a billionaire's bank account. He was comparing his evening version to his morning version. He was building momentum, a force more powerful than any temporary burst of motivation. He was learning that greatness is found in doing ordinary things with extraordinary consistency. Part 6. The 5-minute speaking ritual. Facing the mirror. With his mind clear and his rule of 3 in place, Mark decided to tackle his most painful insecurity, his English. For years, he had been a passive learner. He had listened to countless podcasts and read many articles, but he almost never spoke. The reason was simple. Every time he opened his mouth, he compared himself to others. The thief of comparison had told him that if he couldn't speak like a native, he shouldn't speak at all. But now, Mark was ready to challenge that lie. He started what he called his mirror ritual. Every morning, he would stand in front of the bathroom mirror, set a timer for exactly 5 minutes, and talk in English. There was no script, no audience, and no judgment. He would talk about his plans for the day, his feelings, or even just describe the objects on the counter. In the first few days, it was incredibly awkward. He felt foolish talking to his own reflection, and he cringed every time he forgot a word or mispronounced a syllable. However, Mark noticed a fascinating shift in his mindset. Because he was alone, he didn't have to worry about Sarah's fluency or Jason's judgment. He realized that his mistakes weren't crimes. They were just data points. When he struggled to find a word, he didn't call himself stupid anymore. He simply made a note to look it up later. He was finally practicing vulnerability. He was allowing himself to be bad so that he could eventually become good. He understood that fluency isn't a gift given to a lucky few. It is a muscle built through thousands of clumsy, imperfect repetitions. These 5 minutes became the most important part of his day. He wasn't practicing English just to get a promotion. He was practicing to prove he was no longer afraid. He stopped chasing a native accent and started chasing communication. He found that when he stopped trying to sound like someone else, he actually started to sound like himself. The mirror was no longer a place of judgment where he saw a hollow man. It had become a training ground where he saw a warrior. By conquering those 5 minutes of discomfort, he was slowly dismantling the prison of perfectionism that had kept him silent for a decade. Part 7. The middle of the journey. The silent battle. 3 weeks into his new routine, the initial honeymoon phase of Mark's transformation began to fade. The excitement was replaced by a cold, heavy boredom. This is what psychologists often call the dip, the long, dry middle of any journey where the progress feels invisible and the effort feels exhausting. One rainy Monday evening, after a particularly stressful day at work, the thief of comparison returned with a vengeance, whispering more loudly than ever before. Mark sat on his sofa, staring at the blank wall. His mind was screaming for a distraction. He felt a desperate urge to re-download his social media apps. He felt lonely and isolated in his quiet life. He started to wonder if all this effort was actually worth it. "I've been practicing for 3 weeks," he thought bitterly, "and I still struggle to explain a simple concept to my boss today. Sarah is still faster, Jason is still richer, and I'm just a guy talking to a mirror." The temptation to quit was a physical weight in the room. He felt like he was walking through thick mud while everyone else was still flying in their jets. This was the most dangerous moment of his journey. In the past, this is exactly where Mark would have given up. He would have convinced himself he wasn't built for success. But this time, he remembered a crucial lesson. The middle is where the character is built, not the beginning. He realized that his frustration was actually a sign of growth. You only feel the resistance when you are moving forward. If you are standing still, there is no wind against your face. Instead of reaching for his phone, Mark reached for his Rule of 3 notebook. He looked back at the last 20 days of check marks. He saw 20 days of mirror rituals, 20 days of walking, and 20 days of reclaimed mornings. He realized that even if he didn't feel successful, he was disciplined. He took a deep breath and forced himself to speak 3 sentences in English about how frustrated he was. By acknowledging his struggle, he robbed it of its power. He didn't need to be perfect. He just needed to be stubborn. He went to bed early, knowing that the sun would rise tomorrow, and so would he. The thief had tried to break back into his house, but Mark had changed the locks. Part 8. Retelling. The Formula of Change. As Mark looked back on his journey, he realized that his transformation wasn't a matter of luck. It was the result of a specific formula, a set of strategic choices. He called it the path of the authentic self. Let's break down the 3 pillars that allowed Mark to defeat the thief of comparison and reclaim his life. The first pillar was radical disconnection. Mark understood that you cannot heal in the same environment that made you sick. As long as he was constantly consuming the filtered realities of others, he was feeding his own inferiority complex. By implementing a digital detox, he protected his mental space. He learned that unplugging is not about missing out. It is about tuning in to your own frequency. The ability to focus without distraction is becoming a superpower. The second pillar was micro-consistency. Mark stopped chasing greatness and started chasing the streak. Through his rule of 3, he learned that small actions are powerful. He shifted his focus from the outcome, becoming fluent, to the process, 5 minutes in the mirror. He realized that momentum is built in the small victories. When you win your morning, you win your mindset. When you win your mindset, you win your life. The third pillar was internal validation. This was perhaps the most difficult lesson. Mark had to learn to stop looking for a thumbs up from the world and start looking for approval from himself. He stopped comparing his progress to Sarah or Jason and started comparing his current self to his former self. He understood that as long as your happiness depends on being better than others, you will always be a slave to their success. But when your happiness depends on being better than you were yesterday, you become truly free. Key vocabulary to remember: inferiority complex, a feeling that you are not as good, intelligent, or attractive as other people. Radical, relating to the most important or fundamental nature of something. Extreme. Momentum, the force or speed of an object in motion, or the strength that something has when it is moving. Unplugging, taking a break from technology and digital devices. Internal validation, feeling good about yourself based on your own standards, not others' opinions. Mark's formula was simple: unplug, focus, and repeat. It wasn't easy, but it was effective. He was no longer a victim. He was the architect of his habits. And as he continued to follow this formula, the results began to show in ways he never expected. Part 9. First-person comparison. Then and now. 6 months have passed since that transformative morning in front of the flickering bathroom light. If you had met me back then, you would have seen a man in shadows. I was someone who apologized for my existence, someone who felt like a failed version of everyone else. But today, the air feels different. I am not richer than Jason yet, and my English is still not as perfect as Sarah's, but I have achieved something they might never have. I stopped wanting to be them. I remember the old me would enter a meeting at work and scan the room to see who was the smartest. I would stay quiet, terrified that a mistake would prove I didn't belong. Now, I enter that same room and focus on one thing: how can I contribute? Last week, I actually raised my hand and shared an idea in English. My heart was racing, and I stumbled over the word sustainability, but I didn't die. I didn't feel ashamed. I just corrected myself and kept going. When the meeting ended, Sarah came up to me and said, "That was a great point, Mark." In the past, I would have been suspicious of her praise. Today, I just said thank you and felt a genuine sense of accomplishment. The biggest change, however, is not in my career, but in my quiet moments. I no longer wake up and reach for my phone to see who is winning at life. My mornings belong to me. I still do my 5-minute mirror ritual, but it doesn't feel like a chore anymore. It feels like a conversation with a friend. I can hear the flow in my voice and the confidence in my tone. I realized that by stopping the comparison, I finally gave myself permission to grow. When you stop trying to be someone else, you finally have energy to be yourself. Looking back, the old me was exhausted because he was carrying the weight of 1,000 other lives on his shoulders. The new me is light because he only carries his own. I used to think that success was about reaching a destination where I was better than everyone. Now, I know that success is simply not hiding from your life today. I am finally running my own race, at my own pace, and for the first time in my life, I am not looking over my shoulder to see who is catching up. I am exactly where I am supposed to be. Part 10. Closing. Your own lane. Mark's story is not just about a man and a mirror. It is a blueprint for anyone living in the digital age. We live in a world that profits from our insecurities, a world that constantly whispers that we are not thin enough, rich enough, or fluent enough. But as Mark discovered, the most radical act of rebellion you can perform is to be satisfied with your own progress. The moment you stop comparing is the moment you start living. As we close this chapter at the English Oasis, I want you to take a deep breath and look at your own journey. Maybe your English isn't where you want it to be yet. Maybe you feel like you are behind in your career or your personal goals. But remember this: a flower does not compete with the flower next to it. It just blooms. Your path is unique. Your struggles are your teachers. And your small, invisible wins today are creating a future that you cannot even imagine yet. Don't let the thief of comparison spend another minute in your head. Today, I challenge you to pick your own rule of 3. What are the 3 small things you will do tomorrow to make yourself proud? It doesn't have to be grand. It just has to be yours. Whether it is speaking to yourself for 5 minutes or reading 1 page of a book, do it for you. Thank you for walking this path with Mark and with us. If this story helped you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep building this oasis for learners around the world. Before you go, tell us in the comment, what is one thing you are proud of achieving without comparing it to anyone else? Let's celebrate our quiet victories together. Stay consistent, stay authentic, and most importantly, stay in your own lane. We will see you in the next story.